Welcome to the Profitable NDIS Provider Podcast, where we're joined by your hosts, Tania Gomez and Paul Bryan. In each episode, we'll be sharing valuable insights and tips to help you turn your NDIS business into a profitable venture. So whether you're just starting out or looking to take your business to the next level, you've come to the right place. Let's stop surviving and start thriving.
Welcome to the Profitable NDIS Provider Podcast with your hosts, Paul and Tania.
G'day, Tania. Great to be here again. I'm really excited today because we're talking about staying as an unregistered provider, and we have someone here who I am really proud to announce. We have Caz from Caz Parker Consulting and Core Supports WA. G'day, Caz.
Hi, Paul and Tania. It's great to be here because I've enjoyed your podcast and I love talking about the NDIS.
Welcome. We're excited. You're actually our first guest on the show. It's usually so far it's just been Paul and I. So you're our first guest and we're really excited to have you here with us today.
Well, I'm honoured. Thank you.
Awesome. So I got to know Caz because we've been working together a little bit with her business, Core Supports, and also her consulting. And I thought it'd be great to get the perspective of someone who is unregistered and, how they, are looking out for their participants and the way that they run their business. And what you do, Caz, is fantastic because you really help people be or use self-directed supports, don't you?
Yes, I think it's a really important component of having choice and control because it's the ultimate, I call it the real choice, if you're self-directing your services. And there are different ways of going about that. So with my background in service design, I help people to look at what they want to achieve from their supports and their services and how they want to make that happen.
Fantastic. Could you give us a bit of a background into how you got started?
Well, yes. I came to the disability sector rather late in my career, so I've been doing all sorts of different things, but mostly I've been a business owner and self-employed. Through a series of circumstances, I ended up going back to TAFE and doing a course in what back then was called disability supports, and became part of a program where I was able to study and work in an organisation. So that was really attractive to me because I was getting a lot of practical knowledge and I was getting paid while I was studying. So that was really awesome. And I just discovered that I really enjoyed it. And that was the longest period of my career life. I didn't say that very well, but the longest period of my working life where I've actually been an employee.
Right.
So I was with that organisation for 10 years, starting from a support worker. And as the organisation was growing very rapidly, gradually taking on more roles in management and putting my business skills to use within the organisation. That organisation is still around. They're a large not-for-profit, and they really embedded those values of individualised services and person-centred practice into the organisation. We were funded by DSC back then. And I was involved in a lot of the compliance side of things to do with the funding from Department of Communities.
So why don't you give us a little bit of background about Core Supports WA, what you do, how many participants you support, and how long you've been operating in the space?
Okay, so we've been operating in this space for 2.5 years. I left my job as a support coordinator for a provider. They were a registered provider. And went out on my own as an independent support coordinator.
Wonderful.
As a support coordinator, I'd been working for about 2 years in support coordination. I wasn't finding the services that I wanted to refer my clients to. There were not enough services doing the kind of individualised supports that, to me, are important. So core support started from the lack of provision of services that I thought were really, truly person-centred. I don't do support coordination and core service provision to the same person. I do think it's important for those things to be separate.
And is that why you have the two separate businesses?
Yes.
Is support coordination under Caz Parker Consulting, and the other services are run under Core Supports WA, so that there's no conflict of interest?
Yes, that's the main reason. I do have a few support coordination clients that I have retained because we have a great relationship and I want to keep working with them. But Core Supports doesn't provide services to those same people, and it's quite a different business, so it's good to have the two separate.
Yeah, okay, wonderful. And so today we're talking about staying unregistered, and you are an unregistered provider in this space. Is your intention to always be an unregistered provider?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and why have you made that decision?
Well, in a nutshell, it's irrelevant to the services that I provide. As somebody who's very experienced in the sector, I feel that I know what we need to be doing. And I don't see any benefit from us going through the audit process to prove that.
Yeah.
We're a very small business and I intend to stay that way.
And how many participants do you have when you say small?
Well, currently we have 9 participants.
Okay.
Yeah, so we only take on a new participant when I feel that we're ready to say to the people who refer to me, which are mainly support coordinators, that we've got capacity to take a new client on.
Right.
So we're growing very slowly.
Yeah, that's a great model though, because you're able to really make sure that you're maintaining the level of supports.
Absolutely. I think that in my experience of working in the sector, when organisations start to grow too rapidly, there's a decline in quality.
Yeah. And do you feel that you've been able to meet your business goals by being by staying as an unregistered provider? You're not limited in any way by not being registered?
We're not limited in any way because we don't provide any of the support items, or sorry, that's not the right word.
That's registration areas or support line items is.
No, there's another word that I can't think of, so I'm sorry. We don't provide, for instance, restrictive practices, and we're not plan managers. We're not providing SDA. So there's really very few areas that we can't work in, and that's not really our focus anyway.
And you don't want to work with agency managed participants?
Well, no, it doesn't make any difference if they're agency managed or plan managed to us.
Because you're only looking to be small, so you're not worried about the percentage of percentage of participants who are agency managed as opposed to self or plan managed.
The percentage of participants who are agency managed is rapidly declining. Plan managed is going up. It's quite a strong trajectory up for plan managed. So no, I have never had any issue with needing to also provide to agency managed participants.
And I guess, Paul, this really comes back to what we talked about in our Creating Clients episode of being really clear around who you're serving, because that makes everything else easy, and you know what to register for when you're really clear. So Caz has really determined who her market is, what she needs to serve that market, and she's made the decision that cost of audit, it doesn't actually add to her business there.
Yeah. I had the awesome opportunity to attend a training event that Caz ran, where I got to meet one of her participants who is self-directing his supports, and to see how he's been able to work with Caz to get the supports he wants, but he's the person in control. He's deciding what's done and where he goes and all those sorts of things. And if you're listening, you're going to see this, but if you are looking at, I've actually got a form here or a worksheet that Caz did just about how she operates her services, whether or not, you're in the driver's seat or if you're on a seat in the bus, right? And so obviously, if people are choosing to really look after the services themselves, then they essentially are the business and they're not needing to be registered in that sense.
It's, yeah. Do you want me to just quickly run through these?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So the sheet here says where do you want to sit, but on it are some illustrations. And there's at the top we've got a gentleman kicking back in his own self-drive electric car. That's just going where he wants to go, and he doesn't really have to do anything about it. He's just sitting back there and directing where they're going.
Yep.
And then there's a person driving their own car. Obviously, there's more involved in owning and driving your own car, but that's what they choose to do. Then there's a passenger sitting up front giving directions. So they're still in control, but somebody else is doing the driving for them and doing more of the, obviously maintaining the car if it's not their car, the participant's car. Or there's sitting in the back of a car. Are you just going where the driver's taking you? Which is an analogy.
All right.
It's a good analogy. I use a similar analogy to get people ready for audit, as far as I want them to be in the driving seat and them to be driving their business forwards. So I see how this can really apply to participants and them deciding on where, the direction they want to go on, and from the passive to the active and being involved in those decisions.
Yes, and sometimes people end up sitting at the back of the bus and they're just going whatever the route of the bus is going on. They don't have any agency in where they're going or when they're going to get there. It's just all set up for them. So my ideal service is obviously the kicking back and just directing where you want to go, and it just happens.
Yeah.
But some people like to be more involved.
I'd love to know, what advice would you give someone who isn't yet a provider? Like, would you suggest that they start unregistered, or do you think that, so if they want to jump right into it, they should maybe even just get started with it if that's where they're just going to head?
Well, from a practical point of view, they're going to have to provide services unregistered because the registration process takes a while. It can be up to 18 months before you get access to the portal, and the portal is really like the holy grail for registered providers. So you have to start unregistered.
Yeah.
And so they may find that actually if they look at what their services are, as you advise people to know who your market is, who your ideal client is, and then create your systems around supporting that ideal client, you may find that they actually don't need to be registered.
So you brushed on it before. There's 3 areas that require you, or 4 things that require you to be a registered provider. SDA providers have to be registered. Behaviour support providers, both the writing of the plan and the implementing of the plan, need to be registered. And then if you want to work with agency managed participants, and yes, agency managed participants are declining, but there will always be agency managed participants because of the nature of some complex disabilities or people under public guardians, etc. So there's only 4 things. So if you don't fall within those 4 areas, and as you rightly pointed out, the registration process takes anywhere from 12 months to 2 years. My advice is always, once we've put in that application, is to start operating so that you're learning as you go. And so you're right; they do start operating as an unregistered provider in the beginning. the argument that I hear, and obviously my previous background was registering providers. I've registered 4,000 plus providers. So I guess I'm on the flip side, and I was, there was definitely an interest in me trying to get, promoting registration, because that's where the bulk of our revenue came from.
Yeah.
I no longer do registration, so now I have a slightly different perspective around it. But it really is around doing that business case, isn't it? It's understanding who you're serving and does it make sense. Yeah. So I had a client who called me yesterday, and he is an unregistered provider. He's currently a sole trader. He does, personal care type supports. He's based in Queensland, and he said to me, I want to register. I'm setting up my company from the 1st of July with the new tax year, because I've hit the threshold to be a sole trader. And I said, right, well, you should definitely wait to be registered because it's not transferable. And he said, well, do you think that I should register? And I said, well, tell me about your business. And he walked through the supports that he did, the areas he operates in. And for me, the reason I said, yes, you should register, was that he wants to run SIL houses. And within those SIL houses, he wants to be able to implement restrictive practices. And so for me, it was like, well, you don't want to go to the effort of setting up a SIL house when knowing that the key demographic or majority of people in a SIL house may have a behaviour support plan, whether they come with it or they need it in the future.
Yeah.
You don't want to go to the expense of setting up a SIL house and then not being able to take on any participants and having to wait another 18 months while holding this SIL house.
Yes.
So it's all about knowing your future direction and where it fits. So my advice to that individual was, based on his circumstances, he told me, was he also wanted to add complex nursing care. And I said, no, let's not do that up front, because that adds an extra $5,000 to your audit cost over the 18 months.
Yeah.
And for someone who is, I think he had 6 participants currently, he's obviously not making huge amounts of money. Every dollar really does count, and you need to think about where you invest that to help your business. And so for him, the advice was, register for SIL, register for behaviour supports or implementing behaviour supports, start that process, and in the meantime, keep doing your unregistered business and building that up to a point.
Yeah.
And then when you become registered, start your first SIL house. And then in 18 months' time, at your next audit point, let's look at adding nursing care there, so that we're cutting up the costs. And we're saying it's going to cost you about $5,000 for audit. It's going to cost you about $5,000 to get all your policies together. So that's $10,000 over 12 months you need to fund. Then in the next 12 months, you'll have another audit at the 18-month point. And then you want to add more. So then you've got about another $10,000 at that year. So you've got a $20,000 investment over, say, 3 years you need to make just to become a registered provider. And now let's do the maths on how many participants you need to have that have restrictive practices to make back that money.
Yeah. It's a really compounding effect, isn't it, when you go through the whole process?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you have to be really clear on your business case. And also looking at things like benchmarks. But the NDIS has broken down the actual costs of providing a support, and it's based on 2.1 of the Caz award.
Yeah.
But it shows you all of the costs that the NDIS expects you to have in your business. So looking at that document is really helpful to know what benchmarks you should be looking at for how much your service is costing. I've done that, and I do that with all of the services that we provide. And part of that cost is going to be maintaining your compliance with registration. So if you're not a registered provider, you maybe don't need to be spending that. It's like there's like 5% of...
Yeah. I'd love to know, as an unregistered provider, obviously if you're registered, there's audits, there's all this compliance stuff to go through. How, as an unregistered provider, do you stay, I guess, accountable to make sure that the right things happening in your business, documentation, all those things are happening?
Yep.
Because I can imagine there's a lot of people who really just they haven't had to go through the process, so they just don't know.
Well, and the other side of that is that there's two arguments that I hear all the time for being registered. One is that you seem more legitimate because you've gone through the process, and secondly is that your compliance is going to be better, therefore you have a better service delivery to your participants. So I think that hits on the first one. Do you have structures and processes in place to make sure that you're keeping a check on things even though you're not going through an external audit?
That's complex. Okay, so having worked in the sector and gone through the whole process of working for a provider who was getting ready for registration with NDIS coming into WA, I was advising the CEO of that company about what we could expect from the NDIS, attending all of the sector events and education workshops and so on, and been through several audits with that company. I formed the opinion that that doesn't actually make a whole lot of difference to the quality of service. What makes a difference to the quality of service is the values of the people involved. I know what I would need to have for compliance, and I have to admit to Tania that if you came and looked at my systems, you probably wouldn't find policies and procedures that would pass audit.
Yeah.
But we're very small, so I'm working on those one a month to kind of, because as an unregistered provider, I think it's still important to act as though you're a registered provider. We still have the code of conduct. We still have the quality indicators that we need to be paying attention to. So I just make sure that those are embedded in our system. But ultimately, I think it comes down to the integrity and values of the people who are managing the organisation. For me, that's fairly easy because I'm it.
Yeah.
I do all of the administration and the hiring, and I'm very involved. I read every single case note that comes through. I check every single timesheet that comes through. So I know that my people on the ground are doing the right thing.
Yeah.
But also...
And that's how you minimise the risk, because quality in my eyes is a risk minimisation strategy when you have other people operating on your behalf. So you're taking that role of QA check or quality check by checking everything yourself.
Yes, so all of our systems meet the evidence that's required. So if we got a ping from a plan manager saying, NDIS want us to provide the evidence that this service was delivered, that we've paid you for, I have all that. I know that I have everything to back up what we've done. And we also have the feedback and complaints. As a small provider, I am taking on a lot of that myself, but as we grow, I will be bringing in somebody else to do that day-to-day administration. I was going to say something else about that. It's about hiring the right people, I believe.
Yeah.
You have to be able to hire people that have the same values and integrity as yourself. And the further away you get from that ground level, the less control you have over that. So
more important the systems and the policies and the procedures become.
Yes. So, for a large organisation, yes, they need to have all that in place because they don't have somebody at the top that knows everything that's going on everywhere.
I think you've come from a great perspective there, because you have got, you've been so active previously and you've been through those processes, and so you know what that looks like. I have a concern for people who are coming into it fairly fresh, right? And so they haven't gone through the audit process. They haven't even maybe worked in the industry for a long time to know what's expected. What advice could you give to someone who's maybe just started last year, got their first couple of clients, how do they maintain a level of accountability and be as compliant as possible to make sure they're getting the best service?
Yeah, that's a really good question because, I have the benefit of all those years of experience, but a new person coming in, and I see this a lot on Facebook groups that I'm involved in. I try to help people out with letting them know about answering questions. But I see a lot of that. They've just started out. They've been maybe a contractor for a while, and now they've decided to take on an employee, and they're starting to build up their business. They really need to pay attention to, as I said before, those quality indicators, and look at how they're setting up their business, and would that comply with what's required if you're going through an audit. But they need to educate themselves.
Yeah.
I just see it every day.
I think there is a case, like out of the clients that I've registered myself directly over the years, there's a lot of people who have no idea about disability at all. And so I like that they feel they have to register before they start, because then they are exposed to the auditor demanding that they understand the standards. And audit is can be a scary process for someone who doesn't know the information. And I'm really aware when I go into audit people who have no background in the space, no understanding of the space, and it's their first audit, I'm really conscious of the fact that I don't want them just to have bought policies and been registered by a consultant, that I really want them to have an understanding and have done some research around what is person-centered practice, what are the quality indicators, what are the complaints rules. Everyone can have a complaints process, and I find this even in big organisations who operate in other areas. Like I audit a lot of councils, and councils have ISO accreditation, and they might have childcare centre accreditation, and I might be going through their first NDIS audit with them, and they have complaints policies, but they certainly don't meet the NDIS standards because they're written to ISO standards or to other sets of standards, and they just don't suffice. And the reason, in my head, the reason that we have the requirement of meeting those different rules as a registered provider is so that it is protecting the participant, and so that there's processes in place that are relevant to people with disability specifically, which are different. The needs of people with disability are different than the needs of children in childcare centres or the needs of a council in general, like the general population. So I feel like when people say, do I need to be a registered provider? I think for some people the answer is yes. Some people the answer should be they should go through that process as a learning experience. But for people who have a lengthy background in the space and understand participants and participants' needs, then potentially the answer is only if you want to work with those 4 groups of people we spoke about earlier.
And that's the reason that I see when you look at should I become registered or not become registered, the answer is often I feel that it would help me to set up a viable business, because I maybe don't have the experience in that space to know what it is I should be doing. And going through the registration process, even if they don't end up registering, just getting set up ready to do that, to know what evidence they need.
And you can implement a quality management system without going through audit. And that's what I was explaining to the client who I spoke to yesterday, is that I can work with you to put a good complaints process in place and put a good incident management process in place, and a good, even if it's as simple as let's get a checklist together for your staff files and your participant files, so that in the future, whether it be next year or 2 years or 5 years' time, you want to go through audit, you already are doing compliant practice. As opposed to what I see so often, unregistered providers moving to registered. When I'm auditing them, I get in there and they've got 5 years worth of records or 3 years worth of records, and it's a dog's breakfast. And they fail at audit because they don't have the things in place and they thought that they did. Or as a consultant, they engage me to clean the mess before audit, and we spend 6 or 7 months going through hundreds of files and fixing them, which is just a waste of everyone's time and effort. We just need to put good processes in place in the first instance. Registered or unregistered, my advice would be the same.
Yeah,
I want to throw a curveball at you, Tanya. All right. So let's say one of our listeners is maybe a year older, they're just starting or something like that. But they, we talk about being profitable, but it's also going to be person-centered.
Yes.
Right. So if they're getting started out, they're not thinking about being registered, but they want to make sure that they've got everything in place. Is that something that you help people with?
Oh, absolutely. I can. Generally, I help people who are looking for registration because I come from an audit perspective. But what I'm really passionate about is quality for the sake of improving a business and making a strong foundation, regardless of audit. Again, like for me, compliance is what the government check, but quality is so much more than compliance.
Absolutely.
Quality is being running systems so that they are efficient in your business. And I'm helping a new client I signed up last week. I'm helping them, and they've just gone through audit and have a corrective closeout audit, and they're an amazing business. They're definitely delivering quality services, but they're just not documenting things. So it's as simple as me mapping out their processes from start to finish and going, right, you do case notes here, here, and here. Let's implement a really simple form, or if they're more sophisticated, an iPad or some kind of app to capture that evidence. And usually that's all it is. It's just thinking about the process and someone who has a process mind writing it down and doing it really simply. The policies that you buy off the shelf, and again, I've sold thousands of copies of policies off of the shelf, but they aren't written for an individual's business. They're broad brush general. What you need to do is customize and get a process that works for you, your business, your participants, and your staff. And then, as you said, train them in it. Training is usually the missing element between someone who's got a messy system and a good system. The systems might be the same, but it's how did you train people to use this? How do we make it easy at that level, ground level, to use?
That is something that, as a business, I would rather be spending my profits. Actually, we're a not-for-profit, and I put everything back into the business and the programs that we run. But I would rather be using that percentage of my margin to train people than to pay an auditor to come and say, yes, you're doing everything okay.
Yes.
But again, that's because I have the experience and the background to know what to be looking for.
Yes.
Whereas if you're just starting out and you don't know, then consulting with somebody like yourself, Tania, is going to be really valuable, and Paul as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
About being a profitable business, because profit's not a dirty word. I mean, even non-profits make profit.
Yes.
They usually call it a growth fund.
Yes.
But you have to be sustainable, and if you're not sustainable, then quality is going to slip because you're worrying about money all the time, or you're cutting corners to save money, or you're just not putting that time into your staff.
You can't invest into high quality staff or training staff, and even succession planning for the future if you don't know that you've got enough money coming in to cover the bills and then make a profit. Do you feel that being an unregistered provider does help you to run a more profitable business because you can invest that money in priorities as opposed to audit?
Yes, I do. We run a very tight ship with very low overheads, and I pass that on to our participants. It might be as a discount on the rate that we're charging them. It might be as extra hours, or it might be put into a program that allows me to provide services to people that don't have funding to participate in those things, because I come from a not-for-profit background.
Yes.
If I wasn't doing that, then yes, I would have more profit, but it's always going to go back into the business. You can't just keep taking out. You've got to keep on constantly feeding your business.
I think in any business, I know with all of my businesses, there's definitely a number of years of reinvesting in the business before you're able to take any kind of dividend payments or profit payments at the end of the quarter. It's definitely around knowing what are the priorities in your business and where do you want to spend that money, whether it is investing in a new product line, whether it is moving from one service delivery to another, moving to a new location, marketing yourself, joining networking groups and conferences, all of those things have a cost.
Yeah.
And you really want to make sure that everything you do has a return on investment, even if it's a long one. And figuring out, really doing a really simple budget and figuring out where I use the profit first methodology in my businesses, which is all around breaking up percentages. And I have dyscalculia, which is dyslexia for numbers. And so for me, there you go. For me, numbers have always been scary, and I've had to work really hard on understanding P&Ls and numbers because I've run multi-million-dollar companies. I had to sit in rooms with big accountants and boards where numbers is there, what they eat for breakfast, and I had to present them and know them, and they look like a scramble on the page to me. And so I've really had to, and for me, Profit First really made it simple for me. They break up into, so in my businesses, we aim for a 15% cost of acquisition, a 10% profit margin, which most of it goes back in for reinvestment. Then you've got a 50% cost of delivery, and a 30% overhead, and that makes up your 100%. And sometimes you have owner's comp. In that business, I don't take an owner's comp. I just take a profit because I don't work in that business. But in the business that I work in, I have, I am the cost of delivery. So working out that simple percentages really made it clear for me that then, okay, this is the revenue I'm making. This is how much it costs to get a client. This is how much it has to cost to deliver a client. And this is what's left over. Out of what's left over, some of it is my salary or some of it is for me, and then some of it is to put in the business, and that really makes it clear on what I've got to invest. And I imagine in a registered business, a line item would have to be compliance.
Absolutely,
whether that's part of your 30% overhead or not.
That was, sorry, I just remembered it was the support worker cost model that I was trying to think of the name of before. But I remembered it because we're talking about percentages. I do profit first as well.
There you go.
So I always set aside the amount that I want to have to retain for profit, for growth or whatever. And then I know what all the percentages are for every other cost. Because I don't do numbers very well either. I love my spreadsheets and my percentages because that makes more sense.
All the calculations does it automatically or built the formulas.
So if you look at something like that support worker cost model, and see how it's been broken down by the NDIS. These are industry benchmarks that you can use.
Wonderful. I think that's it for today. I've learned so much. It's been absolutely great interviewing you around all things registered. For me, the main learnings from today is there are people who it makes sense to always be unregistered. There's people who will start unregistered and move into registered when there's a need that may arise. And there's some people that may start as registered providers, and it's not a one size fit all. It's not a formula we can give that you fit in this box. It's really about understanding your business, your clients, your experience level, your capacity, and figuring out the pathway for you that makes the most sense from a business perspective holistically.
Absolutely. Look, I think that people are often putting the cart before the horse there. And they're jumping in, I should be registered, or, I'm just going to be unregistered, whatever it is. Understanding your business model and who you want to serve. Like Caz is very clear on who you want to serve, how you want to serve them. And that's definitely defined her business structure, model, and that as well.
Paul, is this something you help providers work out? Do you do this piece of work around figuring out who their clients are, what their journey should be? Is this something that people can speak to you more about?
It's probably one of the buttons that I push even when I'm talking to someone that might be interested in what we do, because it is so much the core of how the business gets set up, what's going to be next, what we focus on. And, I love you guys talking about like profit first people, because just understanding the numbers in your business is really important. We've got a lot of models to help businesses get around that. So even before I'm working with someone, I want to know, right, who are you working with? Who's your ideal client? That one client model. If you could have one person in your business, who would that be? What service would you provide them? All that, which makes such a difference to how you get set up. What are priorities, whether registration is a priority, a desire, or unnecessary, all those different decisions before someone really gets cracking into possibly a really costly and timely mistake, or missing out on things that they really should get done earlier than later.
Paul's been really helpful with me in my business, discussing ideas that I have and helping to map out where I want to go.
Yep.
And the strengths that I can use to kind of get where I want to go as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've been really helpful.
Oh, thank you very much.
But just going back to what you were saying about the variety of reasons that people might want to be registered, it's such a huge, I don't know how many billions of dollars it is now.
It's going to be 86 billion by 2032.
Yes.
I think it's currently at 32 billion this year, which is 5 billion over budget.
Yeah. So, it's such a huge market that there are so many little niches and needs and reasons that people have for wanting registered or not registered providers, for being registered, being not registered. There's room in it for everybody, and there's no right or wrong way unless you're providing any of those high intensity supports that require registration. I think it's just really important to have a robust sector where there is a lot of opportunity for choice.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Look, that's all we got time for today, but I'm really excited about next week because next week I'm going to interview you, Tania, and we're going to talk about making compliance a part of your everyday business, like how you break it down, how it makes it simple for a business. Again, whether they're registered or unregistered, you're actually making sure that you've got those quality indicators in place. So why don't you give us a little bit of a teaser about what's going to be on next week?
Yeah, so next week it's you and I chatting, Paul, and we talk all things compliance. And what we actually do in that episode is break down what your framework could or maybe should look like from a annual, what do you do annually, what do you do quarterly, what do you do monthly, and how can you break down all of the requirements into manageable chunks so that you don't have this big scramble before audit if you're a registered provider. And some really simple tips, because for me, compliance is the easier, the simpler, the more people use it, the more compliant you are. So we want to make your compliance system so simple that you do a little bit every day, as opposed to thinking of it as something you do annually in the lead up to audit only.
Yeah, brilliant. Awesome. Well, we will see you guys next week. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Profitable NDIS Provider podcast with Tania Gomez and Paul Bryan. We hope you found today's episode informative and valuable. If you enjoyed the show, please don't forget to subscribe, leave us a rating, and share it with others who could benefit from our insights. Until next time, keep thriving.